Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and to speak on Africa, the blessed continent, the irony and the urgent need for holistic ministry. When we talk of Africa, Africa has been named variously. Some people call Africa the dark continent. Others call Africa as the hopeless continent. For others, Africa is a cursed continent. But Africa is most blessed. It's blessed enormously in natural resources, human resources, the diversity of cultures and tribes. It's all an indication of a continent which is so blessed. When you look at the number of converts and churches being planted on this continent, it's just overwhelming. The revival meetings, deliverance services, miracles, and anointing services that result in mega churches across this continent is just amazing. The irony is that despite all of this, Africa continues to be a place of poverty, a place of hunger, deprivations, tribalism, corruption, greediness, envy, acrimony, pull him down syndrome, hatred, jealousy, unemployment, an increase in divorce rates. But we continue to say that there's hope for Africa. There's no there's no country on this continent that is hopeless. Every country on this continent is so blessed. And that's why we say that against all hope, there is hope for Africa. Now, let me just show you a little about Africa. Many don't even know how big this continent is. But you can see from the screen, the whole of the United States can be on this continent. Argentina, India, China, the entire Europe continent, and New Zealand. And yet, you can still have space for the continent. It's so huge, so big. And even for the land space alone, we can see that the continent is blessed. Apart from the land space, you think of the agricultural potential. Every part of the continent, including even the Sahara Desert, has potential for agric purposes. It is so blessed in terms of agriculture. Again, we have enormous rivers all across the continent. And all these rivers and lakes attest to the fact that the continent is a blessed continent. Again, look at the mineral potential. Every country on this continent has some amount of mineral deposits. Some of the most expensive minerals that you can count on can all be found on the continent of Africa. There is no country on this continent that you can't find mineral deposits. Every part of it. And I think we are so blessed, even much blessed, than any other continent on this earth. So when I talk of Africa being blessed, the potential of the land is blessed. The land itself, we have a rich heritage in every domain of life. The people are blessed. The church currently is one of the fastest growing in the whole world. Africa is blessed. But then there is an irony, poverty, hunger, hopelessness, and the reasons why. The richest continent being the poorest. The continent with all the potentials to see prosperity. It suffers from diseases, hunger, and deprivations. This is the irony that we are confronted with as far as the continent is concerned. When you talk of Africa, and when the banner of Africa is raised, what people see are wars, refugees, famine, hunger, poverty, deprivation. These are the things that are associated with the continent of Africa. Many reasons are being given for this. Some think it is lack of resources. From what you have seen, I don't think we lack resources. I think we have far more resources than we need as a people and as a continent. And some also think it is overpopulation. I think when you combine the population of China and India alone, these two countries are far more populated than the continent of Africa. Yes, colonialism did a lot of havoc, a lot of harm to Africa. And that has accounted for some reason our backwardness. But then, again, we can say that it's not only Africa that were colonized. We know of countries that were colonized like Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong. They were all colonized. But I think they are not living in the past. They are moving forward. Global trade is also one of the horrible things that has happened to us. Because even though we produce so much, the prices of our commodities are dictated from outside. We don't have any control over the prices of our own products. And these are some of the things that has affected us. And yet, we can still talk about the potential, the prosperity of such a wonderful continent. I think the obstacles of our transformation is internal. Africa are confronted with basic problems, and one has to do with the unbiblical worldview. The type of Christianity that the missionaries brought to us, which is the dualistic gospel or the Gnostic gospel, I think didn't help us to see life in real terms. People are not living in a reality. We read the Bible and pray every day. But people are tribalistic, and they discriminate against one another. People read the Bible and live in a realm of spirituality, and yet we hate one another and we fight and kill ourselves. People fast and pray to the extent that even some get ulcer because of continuous fasting. And yet, the same people who are fasting and praying are so corrupt, and corruption is so endemic in our part of the world. People sing, "Oh, how I love Jesus," and yet we don't love ourselves. Even some powerful men of God cannot even marry their own wives, and yet we love Jesus. People sing, "Holy, holy, holy," and yet our cities are filled with trash and death. There is an irony about the type of spiritual life we live and the real life situations that we find ourselves. And there seems to be a contradiction of our spirituality and our lifestyle. The second thing has to do with the dualistic mindset that separates, the secular from the spiritual. Because of this message that was brought to Africa, many Christians live in two worlds. One life they call the secular world from Monday to Saturday. And then the spiritual life is lived on Sunday, where we worship God. Now, this has resulted in certain consequences. One is that the Great Commission is lost to Africa. Now, what we are doing on the continent is what Darumila calls the Greek Commission. Instead of discipling nations, we are converting souls, preparing them spiritually for heaven. And so people are so spiritually minded such that they are useless on earth. All that they are looking for is to go to heaven. But to be engaged in spiritual life or economic life or business life, that is seen as unspiritual. So Christians have given business to the world, politics to the world, and other areas of life to the world. And so, yes, we are blessed, but corruption has taken over because majority of the people who are doing business and politics are not people who have the biblical worldview. Secondly, we have lost the Christian mind. When all of life is to be lived for the glory of God, people think the church life, the spiritual life alone, is the life that should be lived for the glory of God. Again, people don't even have the biblical understanding of work. And so when we talk of God's work is confined to churches, to ministries, to mission work. When it comes to education, health, business, politics, these are seen as secular work. And so people who are Christians will not want to be involved in that. And so we have people who are highly spiritual, and yet when it comes to real-life situations, very, very corrupt. And they don't see any reason why Christ should be seen in these areas. Again, the biblical meaning of the church has been destroyed. When people talk of the church now, they are talking of denominations. They are talking of church buildings. They are talking of very expensive equipment. The people for which Christ shed his blood for are completely neglected. So we have air-conditioned, very expensive churches, and yet people that inhabit these churches, majority of them live in hunger and poverty. So where church is seen as building, as a denomination, as equipment, to the neglect of human beings, poverty continue to expand. The other thing the church lost is the Samaritan strategy. The story of the Samaritan strategy is summarized that if you love God, the only way to express our love for God is to love one another. People now think to love God is everything. You can forget about what people do and what people say. And so these 5 things have all been left out because of the type of gospel that was brought to Africa. The other reason for our problems had to do with the animistic worldview. Africa is a place of animism. Africa, south of the Sahara, is confronted with all types of animistic beliefs. And so when people are not confronted with the reality, and we put on glasses like this and live in a very dark world where our world is ruled by spirit, witches, demons, ancestors, powers, then you realize people are not living a life of reality because constantly and consistently they live in fear. The fear of spirits, the fear of witches, the fear of powers that dominate their lives. And because of that, we have no control whatsoever over everything. Mosquitoes control us, rats control, weeds control us, trash control, and we seem to be hopeless because we don't have that biblical worldview that says that when God created man to dominate, to rule, and take charge, that's not there. And so we have all these things that man should take charge, now controlling us. Rivers control us. Even trees. People worship trees and stones as their gods. And it's because of these animistic belief systems. This has resulted massively in our poverty and hunger. So what has happened is that, Okay, so as Dr. Charles Malik said, the problem is not only to win souls, but to save minds. If we win the whole world and lose the mind of the world, you will soon discover you have not won the world. Indeed, it may turn out that you have actually lost the world. The African mind needs to be saved. And that is why when it comes to answers, how do we get answers to these problems? We have to go back to the biblical worldview. First of all, to renew the African mind. As Romans 12, verse 2 says, be ye transformed through the renewing of the mind. The African mind needs to be renewed. We need to apply biblical principles to every area of life. And that means that we need a holistic gospel. A good holistic gospel is needed to impact every area of our life. And this is so crucial because even though many mission agencies say that now the church has moved from the north to the south, and that's when you come to Africa, south of the Sahara, you have the mega churches. People attend services sometimes in millions, because we have all, in my country, Ghana, for example, we have over 70% of the population being called Christians. And yet corruption is so endemic. And so the real problem is not converting souls, because more souls have been converted, but majority of these people who are converted are not even fit for heaven because of the corrupt practice, because of hunger, because of poverty. We need a new gospel, a gospel which is the holistic gospel that can impact all areas of life. A gospel, when taught, will lead people to a life of obedience. As the Great Commission says, teaching them to observe everything. So a gospel that should make obedience and service a lifestyle is what we need in Africa to bring about transformation. A gospel that will focus on the glory of God, whereby all life, economic life, political life, family life, environmental life, all life can be lived for the glory of God. That gospel is what we need. A gospel that would help us to focus on the kingdom of God. As when Jesus was teaching disciples, when you pray, say, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We are here on earth as God's hands, as God's feet, as God's eyes, as God's heart, to make his kingdom come. But when you come to Africa, the reality is that we have majority of our people who claim to be Christians. And yet, our lifestyles is a life of contradiction. And I'm saying all this to end by saying that, yes, missionaries have done great work, because if the missionaries have not come to Africa, I think our situation would have been worse by now. But then, there is massive work to be done, because many are saved, many are evangelized, and yet minds are not transformed. The holistic gospel, I think, is the answer. Thank you.